My name is Patrick Ronk. I'm the president of the SGA, for those of you who do not know. And I just wanted to say a quick few words and thank everyone for being here. I am very, very happy that we have an overpacked room right now, and I really appreciate everyone from the student body being here, or a wide selection of students from the student body being here to talk about these tough but really important issues. Our campus community has faced a tough couple of weeks, and this town hall, I just want to thank MICA, the Student Government Association, and President Loh's office for being so amenable to have this town hall. I'm sorry it couldn't happen right away, but because of various scheduling conflicts, but I'm glad we're finally having it. We want this town hall not to be the end of a conversation, the end of an investigation, but rather the start of something. So don't feel that this is your only opportunity to ask questions of President Loh, to ask questions of administrators, to question the university. This is an opportunity to start advocacy, to get answers, and to move forward to make our campus a more diverse and a more inclusive environment. With that, I just want to say, unfortunately, due to time constraints, we won't be able to answer the questions of every single person in this room, since we're only here till 4:30. So we are having two options. You can be able to come up to the mics once we have open questions and conversations. If you're not able to walk up to the mic, we can have someone bring a mic to you. Or if you would like, you can tweet using the hashtag RiseAbove with your questions, and we'll be monitoring Twitter throughout, and we'll have Twitter questions picked throughout the whole entire forum as well. Without further ado, I'd like to introduce our two student moderators for this afternoon. So Johanna de Guzman, who's the Secretary of the Filipino Cultural Association and the Director of Diversity for the SGA, and Isaiah Mason, who is a brother of Alpha Phi Alpha, and a member of the MPHC Executive Board, will be our moderators. So please welcome them upstage. Thank you.
Good afternoon, students, staff, and faculty. Welcome to the open forum hosted by MICA and the Multicultural Involvement and Community Advocacy Office and the Student Government Association. My name is Johanna de Guzman, and I am the Director of Diversity for the Student Government Association. And I will be one of your moderators for today's panel discussion alongside Isaiah Mason.
Hello, my name is Isaiah Mason. I'm the co-vice president of Alpha Phi Alpha Fraternity Incorporated, the Iota Zeta chapter. I'm also the external vice president of the National Pan-Hellenic Council. I want to first commend the student body in this university, not only for their recent efforts, but for all the past efforts in response to events that have occurred on this campus in the past year. Thank you for your passion and dedication towards trying to make our campus a safer and more exclusive place.
I would like to formally introduce our panelists. We have 8 members of the President Student Leadership Council on Diversity and Unity, and if you all would please take a moment to stand up, introduce yourself, and what organization you represent.
Hi, my name is Diana Kim. I'm the president of the Multicultural Greek Council.
My name is Paul Becker. I'm the current president of the Interfraternity Council.
Hi everyone, I'm Vic Shepelev. I'm the Pan-Hellenic president.
Hi, my name is Jordan Brunson. I'm the president of National Pan-Hellenic Council.
Hi, my name is Andrew Mayton. I am co-president of the Asian American Student Union.
Hi, I'm Olga Morales, and I'm here representing graduate student government.
We also have the president of the UMD Alumni Association, Nicole Pollard, the director of student affairs, Dr. Linda Clement, Chief Diversity Officer and Associate Vice President, Dr. Kumea Shorter-Gooden, and finally, our university president, Dr. Wallace Loh. Thank you for putting aside the time to answer and listen to student concerns and questions. The purpose of today's forum is to bring attention to the campus climate that has been brought upon by not only A.J. Hurwitz's email, but by the seemingly repeated acts of racism, sexism, and inequity. Today will provide an open floor for the university's community to discuss how together we can change policy, improve our campus, and how we can be better role models of inclusion and equity. Students, I hope that you take advantage of this opportunity and ask the departments represented on this panel today that are future action-oriented. Panel, I hope that you listen to the students' concerns and take their inquiries back to your committees and staffs when deliberating about implementing change on this campus.
With that being said, President Loh, would you like to come up and make an opening statement?
Thank you, Isaiah and Joanna. And thank you, Patrick, and to MICA for organizing today's forum, Rise Above. And to all the members of the University of Maryland community, thank you very much for coming and engaging in this important conversation. My remarks will be very brief because the purpose is not to give a talk, but to just set the stage and for me to listen and respond to questions if there are any, and there are other people who can respond to the questions as well. The idea for this forum occurred totally spontaneously. As you remember, 3 weeks or so ago, when this thing first broke, on the spur of the moment, I decided to do a Twitter chat. And when thousands of tweets were coming in and I was just skimming through them, all of a sudden I saw a tweet from Patrick Ronk. And he asked, would you be willing to participate in an open forum? That was the only tweet I replied to a few others. But that was the only name I recognized, and I immediately said yes, and it's taken us about 3 weeks to organize. So thank you for doing it. Let me just set the stage by saying this. When this horrific, despicable email came out, the first thought that came to my mind, other than the fact that I was so deeply offended and I was personally hurt, is that this is an incredible teaching moment. It is an incredible learning opportunity for the whole campus, faculty, staff, students, alumni, to address basically 2 issues, which is what we're here to talk about. Number 1, if somebody says or writes the horrific things that he did, can that go unpunished? Or do we live in a country where there are laws and principles that say that under certain conditions, no, you cannot punish? That's issue number 1. It's an issue between retributive justice, punishing, versus what's the alternative? An alternative that I call restorative justice, that I learned from my days when I took courses on nonviolence and read many, many leaders, including Mahatma Gandhi and Nelson Mandela. Find truth, find reconciliation, and do not punish under certain conditions. That's issue number 1, and different people can disagree. And we welcome those expressions of views. The second question is, all right, a decision has been made one way or the other on whether or not to punish that person. There's a larger issue and a much more difficult issue. And that is, what are we going to do to make this a better university, change its culture, so that these incidents don't happen again? Specifically, if somebody writes this stupid and truly despicable message, and several of his friends read it, why is it it took 14 months for us to hear about it? Why did they not respond right on the spot and say, that is not appropriate? So it's not just the change in the culture of that fraternity, it's changing the culture of all Greek life, and indeed changing the culture of the University of Maryland itself. You want to go further, changing the culture of this country. That is the more difficult issue. But we are absolutely committed to it. And let me tell you, just conclude, what I believe that culture should be. It is more than just inclusivity and mutual respect and safety. I came to this country as an immigrant, and I was drawn to this country by the Latin in this nickel. E pluribus unum, one formed from many. Those of us who grew up in the 1960s and fought for diversity, because there was no diversity in those days. And all of a sudden, we're in the 21st century, and the issue is not only diversity, it's also unity. How do we keep this country from falling apart? How can we reconcile, accept various differences, and still have that vision, which I don't know is going to happen in my lifetime. That vision I heard as a 15-year-old boy when I traveled 1,500 miles and I hitchhiked, to hear a pastor say his vision that someday his children will be judged not by the color of their skin, but the content of their character. And when this young senator that I heard at the Democratic Convention say, there is no Black America or white America or Asian America or Latino America. There's only the United States of America. How can we become a more perfect union in this country and the University of Maryland?
Okay. Before we get the conversation rolling, I would like to present a few ground rules for today. First and foremost, let's all stay respectful. Number 2, keep the conversation diverse. Try to keep your questions to a minute or less, please, in order to get all the questions answered. For the sake of equity, it'd be best to have the speakers line up in the designated areas. As you can see to your left and to your right, and in the middle, there are microphones. So whichever one you feel comfortable going up to, it would be best to approach those. And share your perspective or pose your question, and then please be seated. We ask that the audience members be limited to one question or comment. After speaking, please take a seat to wait the response from the prospective panelists.
To begin the question and answer portion of today, Isaiah and I would like to pose the first few questions.
The first question that we're going to pose is for Matt Supple. Matt, can you speak on the initiatives Greek life is undergoing to, number 1, be more inclusive, tolerant, and accepting to the local chapter level, to ensure that an environment that exists where someone felt it was okay to send that type of email no longer exists, and to number 2, find ways for real, authentic collaborations among the multi-Greek cultural councils, the MGC and the MPHC, and the more historically white councils, IFC and PHA.
Yeah, so to address the first question, within fraternity and sorority life.
Please come on. That's cool.
Good afternoon. Can you hear me better? So to address the first concern, it's important that we work to identify and dismantle systems of oppression that may exist anywhere within fraternity and sorority life. That starts with the way our organizations do recruitment. That starts with the new member education period that our chapters have new members go through, and that continues through all of the chapter programming for the time that we have undergraduate members in fraternities and sororities. In the Department of Fraternity and Sorority Life, we have a set of expectations that all of our fraternities and sororities are required to complete. We have added 4 requirements that each chapter will have to complete once each year. The 4 programs would be 1 on sexual assault prevention, a 2nd on diversity and inclusion, a 3rd on alcohol and drug education, and a 4th on hazing prevention. Our expectation is that we would partner with the student leadership of the 4 governing councils, as well as the 56 recognized fraternities and sororities, in working to address the 4,500 students who belong to fraternities and sororities at the University of Maryland in a way that improves upon racial sensitivity and awareness, and that we address whatever structures of power and oppression may exist within fraternity and sorority life. In terms of working to bring all 4 of our councils together, we have fantastic student leaders of all 4 of our governing councils who already meet every 2 weeks to talk about issues going on in the community and ways that we can work to bring our community together. I think that we'll see over the next few weeks plan for our community to start working this year, spend some time over the summer, hashing out what the details look like, and then implement in the fall semester. But certainly I know it starts with being able to have conversations and dialogue around the experience of students of color within fraternity and sorority life, as well as expectations that we have of one another in the community.
The next question is for Dr. Shorter-Gooden. Can you speak on the specific initiatives and programs that your office is doing to both combat racism, prejudice, but also foster a better multicultural environment among students and student groups?
Certainly. I'm going to stand anyway because I'm kind of short. First, let me thank you all for being here. I'm fully aware because I have my own personal experience. Can you hear me? Okay. I'm fully aware of how traumatizing and re-traumatizing this email is, that it not only is horrible because of the particulars of it as one instance, but that for many of us, it's re-traumatizing because it stirs up experiences we've had on and off campus related to our identities. So I appreciate everyone being here so that we can work collectively. So what are we doing from my office? My office is the Office of Diversity and Inclusion. We're doing a number of things, and I'm also anxious to hear from you what other things you think we ought to be doing. So I'm here to listen and learn. But a couple of things that we're doing. We are the Rise Above office. We have this educational campaign around rising above isms. And with that, we have a mini grant program. If you apply to us tomorrow, within a week, we'll get back to you about you're doing some kind of programming with up to $750 for us that helps bring together people, often across differences, to address biases, stereotypes, identity. This is, and we started this 2 years ago. We actually haven't gotten as many applications as we'd like, so we'd really want to encourage you, particularly registered student groups, but it's also open to units and departments. It's a way of us drilling down on issues of bias and prejudice. It's not just bringing in a speaker, it's getting people to talk about who are we, what are our differences, where do they come from, where do our biases, where do our isms come from, what are the intersections and how do they play out. So Rise Above Isms mini grant is one major program. We also have a Moving Maryland Forward grant program. That's a larger program of up to $15,000 for, again, registered student groups, departments, units, to apply for a pilot program for a year to address some aspect of our strategic plan for diversity. So that too is a venue for thinking about how we can better engage students and staff and faculty across differences. We have our, back to Rise Above, we have our annual Rise Above Isms Week in the fall. We have semester-long campaigns. In this past fall, it was Rise Above Ableism. This semester, we're actively engaged in Black Lives Matter at UMD. Encourage you to come out to those events. We and many others across the university are sponsoring those events. So there's a whole menu of things. You can go to diversity.umd.edu to see what we're doing. We're also doing things, let me mention just a couple things we're doing with faculty and staff, because we know that the culture of the university is not just students. We are doing work with faculty called the Cultural Competence Course Development Project to engage a cohort of faculty in making their courses helping them to address cultural competence in their courses. And you know cultural competence courses help to meet the diversity gen ed requirement and therefore credit. I've been doing workshops with deans and chairs of departments on creating inclusive departments where we talk about implicit bias and unconscious bias. We know that faculty, chairs, administrators we all have work to do to make sure that the classroom and the mentoring experiences are ones that are bias-free for students. So those are some of the things that we're doing.
Okay, also, I didn't mention earlier, but questions taken from audience and also on Twitter using the hashtag #RiseAbove. So if you have questions and you want to ask them from the seat, just go on Twitter and use the hashtag #RiseAbove. Without further more being said, we'll now take the questions from the audience. Okay, so Colin, you go first.
All right, first of all, I heard, can y'all hear me? Hello, 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 hello. It's working? Working?
Yeah.
First of all, I heard that this was going to be organized by SGA and MICA, but I feel like it's being organized by Ted Cruz with all this filibustering. But anyways, I got two questions. President Wallace Loh, on Friday, the editor of Pulse Feeds asked you about renaming the football stadium, and you replied that the Washington Monument is named after a slaveholder. Exactly what would stop you from renaming, from supporting the renaming of a stadium that is currently named after someone who was a member of Sigma Alpha Epsilon and who also denied Thurgood Marshall admission to the law school on the basis of race, and whose record on diversity, equity, and inclusion is an abomination and a sharp contradiction to the university's supposed commitment to its core values of respect for human dignity, diversity, and inclusiveness. And the second question, President Loh, between the first and second quarters of the football team's 23 loss to Syracuse on November 9th, 2013, the university honored former Syracuse football player Wilmot Sidat Singh, I'm not sure if I got that right, and his family. Sidat Singh was forced to sit out of a 1937 matchup in College Park between the two teams because of his race. Don't you think it would be a good idea for Curly Bird's family to similarly honor the families of Thurgood Marshall, Donald Gaines Murray, and Perrin Mitchell, all of whom clashed with Curly Bird as they attempted to study at this university?
And keep in mind, if you ask questions, make sure that you state your name.
My name is Colin Bird. Bird as in Bird Stadium, same spelling, no relation except probably plantation.
Mr. Bird, thank you for the question.
You're welcome.
So let me first address the issue of the naming of Bird Stadium. The naming of any building on this campus is ultimately decided by the University System of Maryland's Board of Regents upon the recommendation of the President. And the President makes its recommendation on this issue as well as on any other issue by our system of shared governance. The President is not so autocrat that just issues orders. The President has to consult with many different groups, get their input, and then hopefully find a consensus and submit a recommendation. With that as background, Curly Bird, I believe, was the longest serving president for about 20 years. If I recollect correctly, he began his presidency in 1935. He ended his presidency before Brown versus Board of Education was announced on March of 1954 that declared that segregated schools are unlawful. As an official of the state in the 1930s and 1940s, he was living in a state that was segregated. The University of Maryland was segregated. All the other institutions were segregated. I'm not saying it's right. And so you're raising the question, yes, he was a racist, he was a segregationist. Should we today change his name? It's a valid question. You have a First Amendment right to ask that question and to probe very deeply. I will set up a process in which different groups will discuss this issue and make their recommendation to me just as they would on any other issue. But let me just say this.
So what is your opinion currently? I'm just curious.
I'm not kidding. I'm trying to be respectful and answer your question, sir.
I said, what is your opinion currently? You said you got to consult with a lot of people. What is your personal opinion? They're going to tell you their personal opinions. What is your personal opinion?
My personal opinion is the final opinion that is sent to the Board of Regents. You do not make a decision. It will be an insult to these committees if I were to stand here and say, this is my opinion, before they have even gotten together to discuss this. But I will say this, Mr. Bird. Last month was the 50th anniversary of the Selma March. They crossed that bridge in March of 1963 or so.
I'm sorry to interrupt, but just in respect of everybody who's lining up now.
Yeah, I will say this very quickly.
Okay.
But that bridge that they crossed, where the marchers were bludgeoned, bloody, was the Edmund Pettus Bridge. Nobody in Selma wants the name of that bridge changed, even though he was the head of the Ku Klux Klan of Alabama. Why? Because that is part of our history. We do not condone that history, but we do not want to forget it. That's point number one. Point number two was what again? He had a second question.
Don't you think, given the situation with the Syracuse Maryland football game last year at halftime, don't you think that it would be a good idea for Curly Bird's family to honor the families of Thurgood Marshall, Perrin Mitchell, and Donald Gaines Murray?
I will leave that to the athletic department to consider.
Thank you for your consideration.
Thank you.
And we ask that the panelists also keep your responses to 1 minute so we can get through as many questions as we can.
Next, we're gonna go to the left, to my left. Stationary.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Muftar Shanaba, senior BS Community Health major, part of Black Male Initiative. And I have a question for President Loh. First, of course, I do like a statement from Bill Hungerford. It says that ignorance is the weapon of tyrants. Now, basically justifying this action, now I know that this email was not part of university policy, did not violate university policy, but nonetheless, it's just allowing any scathing matters, basically. Like, it's just opening the door for more people to say such scathing things towards members of my campus community, towards our people. Seeing that you are interested in eliminating racism stated in your code of diversity of inclusion, right? I know we should expect some institutional change, but on a more personal level, I have a question. On a scale of 1 to 10, how do you feel about Nimburu Cultural Center? How important do you think it is to you?
The Nimburu Cultural Center is a very important part of this university, as are many other cultural organizations, and we value their presence and the activities that they sponsor on this campus.
And basically, thank you. So if Nimburu Cultural Center is very important, how is it ignored? Why is it ignored among incoming freshmen, visitors, tourists, despite the fact that it had very adjacent to the Stamp Student Union, knowing that this is a freedom house for multicultural students?
I honestly do not know where the visitors and tourists of this campus go. They may be ignoring the Nimburu. They may be ignoring many other places too. If we want to put it on the map, make it more visible, surely we should do that.
Wanna go?
Hello, my name is Sierra. Oh, I'm gonna put this down. My name is Sierra Kelly Chung, and I'm Outreach Chair for Community Roots. I have growing concerns with the President Loh's new Student Advisory Board. There were 2 meetings on March 25th and April 1st that were not advertised to any cultural political organizations, and then they became the advisory board. Because this is your advisory board, how do you decide which groups are included and which groups to exclude out of this group? I'm asking you this because it is supposedly supposed to be based off of inclusion, but you haven't included all groups. I'm aware that only presidents are invited. By doing this, are you implying that only presidents are qualified to advise you on these issues? Are these minutes available to all students? Because so far they have been exclusive to student activists still have not had their voices heard. There needs to be more transparency with what happens at these meetings. Student organizations that have focused their efforts to educate our student body on diversity issues for years are still being left out of the conversation. It's problematic because if the purpose of this board is to explore and teach our students about diversity, you cannot hand choose. It needs to be based off of merit. And minority orgs should have the freedom and ability to choose who best represents our best interests and who can efficiently run diversity training.
There are 620 or so student organizations on this campus. When I was asked at the very last minute, would you consider bringing together a very diverse group to help advise you, I said, absolutely. And then I turned to Dr. Linda Clement, and I said, I know there's 600. I'm not going to have the presence of 600 organizations come in and meet with me. It is simply too large of a group. So would you like to respond to that question?
We pulled together a group pretty quickly to respond to that, and I think we're thinking through who it is we need to have in the room.
this isn't going to be the sole end of this. And some of the ideas that have come forward, we want to keep the group small, 15 to 20 people, so it can have a good conversation. But we'll take a look at what the composition is currently and what we think it needs to be. So we'll reconsider that for sure. And it could be that we would rotate from year to year so that some new voices can be heard every year. So I'd appreciate your advice.
Thank you for considering that.
Hi, my name is Pegah Malecki. I'm a junior English major. And I'm a part of a group on campus, and I'm not going to mention what group because I don't want to represent that group by speaking my beliefs, that goes around to classes, organizations, groups, and fraternities and sororities, and we present on matters of sexual violence, stalking, and domestic violence. And President Wallace Loh, you've shown a lot of care into this matter of sexual violence on our campus with the Rule of Thumb campaign, the new online sexual violence mandatory training, and I would hope that you know what rape culture is. So rape culture is the perpetrating of rape and sexual violence through jokes, talking about you know, things that are like making light of rape, making light of sexual violence, making light of consent. And what bothered me is that you stand by this. You came to a training that I went up to Step Up training, and you talked about this issue. So I was made to believe that you care about sexual violence on our campus. But with an email that literally said F consent, so promoting that men in that fraternity rape women, you say that this doesn't violate university policy. And so what I've read, and I believe many people have read, is that rape is okay by university policy. And maybe people can say that this is freedom of speech, but words and verbal, like saying that, that's what leads to sexual violence. So as a, I just want you, I guess my question, and as I'm not speaking out on anyone else, but as a personal survivor of sexual violence, I find this really offensive and really just like, kind of just like a slap in the face to me, because you're telling me that I'm not safe on this campus and I already feel unsafe. So I just want to know, you speak a lot about this, so what are you actually going to do? Because if this doesn't go against the policy, then I don't want to go here anymore, you know? President Loh.
I speak as someone who has served as a prosecutor and prosecuted rape cases. You could not find somebody who is more committed to addressing the issue of sexual assault. You raise a very important question, which is why we're having this forum. And that is the primacy of the Constitution. So long as the words, horrific and despicable as they are, which is why we had the police do an investigation. One thing we know is that under the Constitution, the words are not read in a vacuum. You just don't simply read the words F, consent. You do an investigation of the time, the place, the context, the intent. You interview people. Because, to give you an example, if you were out in the field and you shout fire, that's perfectly fine. You shout those same words in a crowded theater, the result will be different. My point simply is this. This is a very important issue, but under the principles of this country, as far as we can tell, and the head of Title IX, sexual misconduct, came independently to the conclusion that those words are protected by the First Amendment to the United States Constitution.
Well, I have another question. Just really quick, you said that your investigations, you said you did an investigation, you didn't find whatever. My question is, did you look into seeing if anyone reported a sexual assault or a rape during that specific time by anyone in that fraternity? Was that part of your investigation? And is that something you can answer? That's a great question.
Because under FERPA, it is confidential, I cannot tell you the details. I can tell you that why it took this long, it's not because somebody was just reading that. They were interviewing people. A number of people who received it, a number of people who could have received it. That is why the University Police and Prince George's County Police were involved.
The next question we're going to have is from one of our Twitter tweeters. At Priorities said, what efforts are being made to help support and heal those who are hurt by messages and activities similar to the email circulated? And this would be addressed to Matt.
Can you repeat that question? I'm sorry. What services are being provided to help respond to people hurt by that email?
Correct.
Certainly, university resources, including the counseling center, in terms of individuals specifically hurt by the words or threat of violence, and work being done with the Office of Diversity Inclusion, Multicultural Involvement and Community Advocacy, the Common Ground Dialogue, Inclusive Language Campaign. All of those offices and programs are in place to try and enhance the dialogue that's going around it. But in terms of people who are personally hurt by that, certainly the counseling center, mental health at the health center would be great resources for folks to know about. And then again, processing it, continuing to talk with peers, increasing the dialogue, addressing whatever of culture of silence may exist anywhere on this campus that would allow those types of comments to go unaddressed or unchallenged.
We're going to go to the middle next.
All right, my name is Tamaine. Yesterday, President Loh, you released an article in the Diamondback in which you urged us to forgive AJ, not for his sake, but for our own. It frees us from our hurt and anger. That's verbatim. I'm not angry, but rather I'm impressed by the audacity in your attempt to make us sympathize with the bigot as opposed to the victims who are subject to that bigotry. When you came to that sit-in, held by the NAACP, and I attempted to speak with you as a woman of color directly affected by this email, you were not only condescending, but you continued to hide behind legal jargon like you've done just now, and referenced your 3 years of work as a public prosecutor. I wrote that here, so I anticipated that. When I wanted to speak to you as a human, you came to me as a politician. Many bystanders, including staff and faculty, were equally alarmed that you would speak to me, primarily me, but also 2 other women at that table that asked you questions the way that you did. A student who spoke at the sit-in even got up to address that very issue in his speech. The fact that you have not apologized yet leads me to believe that you don't find the way in which you address this problematic. We as women, who I remind you are victims of this incident, don't feel comfortable approaching you with our concerns unless we're in this public forum, after the way you addressed us. This is why it troubles us that you make the decision of who is on this board, especially in light of the change in the sexual misconduct policy. I'm not noticing a lack of representation for me on that board that you have handpicked. We understand that there are 600 plus student orgs on this campus, but how about you include the ones that have been outspoken about this issue before the prospect of an advisory board was even on the table? That have planned these protests and have made it clear that they have a stake in this issue. If you want to construct a diversity board, where's the diversity in thought? I want to let you know that we want you to enact some change. If you do not allow us to decide who is involved in the advisory board after we have made it clear that we as students do not feel safe with the current campus climate, you will make it clear who you are protecting. Now, when we went on that protest, Matt, you stand on the lawn with a phrase that said on a sign, "There is no hate in Greek life." When addressing this, that's another issue. We want to acknowledge that not every individual in Greek life is sexist or racist. But when you employ that phrase as a political maneuver, you are trivializing these incidents, such as that email, which proved that phrase to be patently false. I would expect someone who is trained in dealing with these issues to realize how offensive those statements are to the students who have experienced, like that girl who spoke earlier, that hate from the Greek community. I'm addressing this to you, Loh, and to you, and everyone else on that board, that you do not have my best interest in mind as a woman and a minority and a student on this campus when you are more concerned with trying to make me less angry, because you should be more concerned about making me feel more safe. We want you to be transparent. Publish these meeting minutes. We want you to address us. I want you to address me like a human being. Therefore, if there continues to be a lack of transparency with these meetings, a lack of diversity on the board, if there continues to be this use of rhetoric and condescending tone when talking to women, like the way you spoke to me, I'm going to be frank in saying that you shouldn't be worried if we will ever forgive AJ Hurwitz. You should be worried if we will ever forgive you. Thank you. I mean, I don't even know if he can address that or not. I'm just saying it, yeah.
Okay. Before we continue, we're going to go to the next Twitter question, then we're going to go to the left. This is from Kiera, not Kara. She didn't ask him to respond. She didn't ask him to respond, so he doesn't respond. Diversity events are great, but the people that go to them aren't the people that need to be. How is that going to be fixed? Also, when you tweet, if you tweet a question, if you would address it to, maybe a specific panelist, that would definitely help us out in figuring out where to get the answer.
That's a great question. Clearly, we often see the usual suspects at events. I went to the Asian Pacific American Heritage Month launch the other day, and fortunately it was a little more than the usual suspects, but the group was certainly 90+% seemingly of Asian and Pacific Islander heritage. So I think that's a really important question. I think it really, the answer is with all of us, that we really have to figure out how to work across boundaries. We really have to figure out how to bridge student groups, staff groups, faculty groups. That grant program, I'll mention again, is one way to do that. You can apply for up to $750 from Office of Diversity and Inclusion to get support in doing that kind of bridging. I don't think there's a singular solution, but I think it's all something we all have to commit to. I very frequently have students say to me, it's great we have all this diversity, but we're not taking advantage of it. We're not learning from it. And somehow we have to figure how to provide these spaces which are wonderful for people in their own identity groups to come together, particularly people from marginalized groups to have space to come together. But we've got to do that as well as find ways to bring people together across boundaries. And I think we all have to work at that together.
We're going to go to the left now.
Hello, my name is Mariah Ray, and I'm the Vice President of NAACP and the Director of the Vagina Monologues. I have two quick questions. NAACP had a town hall directly after this event occurred at 6 p.m., a time that is a lot more convenient for many students. 3 p.m., most of us are in class, and I sought permission to be here right now. So what I'm asking is extending an invitation to you to have a town hall with the students where you're not on a stage, we're on the same level of us at a time that is more convenient for the student body to be present. My next question is in reference to speech codes. So several universities, including Emory University, have what they call a speech code, which is particularly used to take care of these sorts of incidents. And it's supposed to prevent hate speech and prevent the First Amendment for protecting people and calling it hate speech. So would the university consider adopting speech codes that will make sure that this sort of language that you seem very upset about cannot continue on this university campus?
Both those questions for President Loh?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
As a state agency, we report for legal matters to the Attorney General's office. I will be more than happy to try to craft policies to address this issue. But ultimately, even after you have crafted it, the ultimate question is whether this new policy you've crafted violates the First Amendment.
You didn't answer my second question about coming to a town hall that's more convenient for students and not a political stunt.
I did not organize this meeting. I did not set the time.
That didn't answer the question, but okay.
Are you willing to go though?
We're gonna go to the middle.
All right. So we got 2 minutes, right? All right. So I'm gonna go ahead and address this.
Trey, you have 1 minute.
I got. Give me 1.5, cause this is big. So on January 20th, a girl called in to the police dispatch and said, a black man wearing a green sweatshirt and gray sweatpants. He physically robbed me. He looked like he not a student. From then on, it happened right on our campus. The police locked me up, put me in a cell without telling me my rights and also not telling me what had happened. The only thing they told me was, you fit a description. And it's all started because this person decided to racially profile me. And as a minority, and you're a minority too, and you promote that, I feel disappointed with you. I'm going to tell you the truth. Because many Asian Americans who wear hijab and had to go through hate speech, or many African Americans who wear hoodies and had to get locked up without saying their rights, will say that hate speech should have some consequences. And right now, within the University of Maryland community, I see that there's no consequences for hate speech. Even just now, we just had a criminal court for the girl that accused me, and she was found not guilty. So I just want to know, what does inclusion really mean to you? Because when I look outside of STAMP, I see that, you know, it's a lot of separation going on, and we need to bring more inclusion. When we go to STAMP and we look in, we see whites sitting with whites, we see blacks sitting with blacks, but we need to bring it all together, because I believe that true diversity is when everyone gets together and everyone learns about each other, different backgrounds. So stuff like that, where people could call in and say, I feel threatened because a black man is on my campus. Stuff like that don't happen if we learn about each other's background. So what is true inclusion to you? That's what I want to know.
That's to President Loh.
President Loh.
E pluribus unum, one formed from many. And that is, of course, the goal that we've been trying to reach ever since the founding of this republic.
Before we go to the gentleman on the left, we're going to take another Twitter question. This is from @UnderTheRag. In reference to the sexual conduct training that all students were mandated to take, what other steps need to be taken so this doesn't repeat? And so the email doesn't repeat.
We were pretty pleased with the turnout for the online training, but if you haven't taken it, I really encourage you to do so. We'd like to be 100%. But the gold standard that we're working toward is peer-to-peer, in-person training. This spring, we will train over 1,000 people through CARE over in the health center. We are going to pilot next fall in the UNIV courses a unit on sexual misconduct. So we're working toward that person-to-person, and we'll ramp up and continue till we can get to every single person on the campus. That's our commitment.
Go to the gentleman on the left.
Hello? Hello, everyone. My name is JT Stanley. My concern is that our solutions proposed are reactive and are not long-term, and that even solutions that we suggest now that are long-term, that we're not doing our due diligence in 3 weeks if we are not having a thorough process to go and find out all the ways in which Greek life culture has ramifications on the body, and then going through a thorough process of investigating them and proposing solutions. A woman that feels dehumanized by going to a bitch in the ball event is not going to speak out loud at this town hall. A fraternity member who is not comfortable with the hazing that's going on, but doesn't feel like they could bring it up to their leadership or will get an effective response through the hazing hotline, is not going to speak out at this town hall. That's why I took it upon myself to speak out with leaders from the community, with MICA, CARE, and the Commission on Ethnic Minorities, to try and get support and get a community effort behind having a process which will go through, and not just in town halls, although I applaud the effort on behalf of the SGA and MICA for going through with this, but we'll go through and conduct anonymized research with all the people that are involved in the stakeholders, and then go through a long-term process with members of the community to propose solutions. And so, as I've said, I've been reaching out to people, but I haven't reached out to everyone, and I'm trying to do that. If anyone wants to be involved in this, or can just wants to give their opinion, please come and talk to me. And to my question, I'm aware that during this investigation that the university has worked specifically for Office of Student Conduct to see if there's been disciplinary recourses for Mr. Hurwitz. It says in section 10A that any conduct by a student which could cause reasonable apprehension of harm is an infraction of the student conduct. And saying fuck consent is telling and advocating and proliferating the belief that people should go out and assault other people on this campus. I am sure, as I've talked to directors and the in Office of Student Conduct, that there's a legitimate reason as to why. So I'd like to ask why we didn't pursue disciplinary action through that. And I'd like to say, if we do not have a Code of Student Conduct, which is able to give disciplinary recourses for an email like that, then that is not a university I will donate my money to. That is not a university I will tell my little sister to go to. Thank you.
JT, who would you like to direct your question to? Okay. Does anybody want to take a question?
Take this question.
The investigation, the independent investigation that was done by our Title IX office really took into consideration whether or not something could be referred to the Office of the Student Conduct, and it was determined by that office that this wasn't an appropriate referral. It was considered that the investigation decides whether it gets referred to the office, and it was decided. It was not referred to the Office of Student Conduct.
Right now we go to the gentleman in the middle.
Thank you. My name is Chris Bangert-Drowns, and I'm the co-president of the Student Labor Action Project. Through these last 2 semesters, I've become increasingly disgusted with and distrustful of this university and its practices. I cannot trust an administration that for 14 years has refused to follow its own policy in regards to a predominantly people of color part-time workforce. I cannot trust an administration that finds a violently racist and misogynist email not in violation of its own policies. I cannot trust an administration that takes disproportionate action against Black and Latino Greek organization and leaves the parallel white organizations relatively unscathed for obviously egregious behavior. I cannot trust a police chief who spends more time dodging questions than demilitarizing his police force. I cannot trust this administration to react to situations responsibly when the panel before us hardly includes any of the activists who initially brought this email to light and have fought to make this a public issue, and you have them sitting in the back row. President Loh, we can talk in circles about free speech, and we can send out innumerable emails proudly touting the diversity of this campus. But my question to you is this: how can any student feel safe on this campus when we have trouble even trusting the administration that governs this campus? And how can we begin to rebuild this trust?
Before you answer that question, there's an overflow room right there that we've been encouraged to tell you all to move into. There's video and sound so you can see and hear what is going on. But in order to keep the balance of the room, some people stand on the sides and in the back will move into there, that will help us out. Guess not.
I don't know if the police chief is here and he can respond to some of the issues that you've raised. I know that Chief Mitchell has spent many, many hours talking to students on issues that you've raised. He's formed this police advisory board, and the dialogue continues. And I think safety is absolutely essential. Without safety, then of course, very little else can be accomplished. But I also want to make one thing very clear from where I sit as president. My responsibility is to ensure the safety of all the students. When I look at the tweets I've been getting, and I get thousands, but I skim them, what really also pains me, recognizing, of course, the sense of fear and anger and hurt, but also the very specific threats made to the person who wrote the hideous email. I do make a distinction. I do not condone in any way what he has said. We need to change the culture. But I also condemn not only what he said, I condemn violence, especially threats of violence to a specific individual, no matter who that individual is.
question is? All right. So we have a Twitter question, then we'll go to the lady on the left. This is from YVish for Andrew Mayton. Can you give your perspective on this university's treatment of sexual violence versus other types of violence?
Absolutely. Sure. So in 2012, a boy named Alexander Song was writing in a forum somewhere on the internet, and he was talking about threatening the school with gun violence. He was threatening shooting it up, et cetera, et cetera. The police went to his home, went to his dorm, arrested him, brought him in, questioned him, investigated everything, found him to be unarmed, and charged him with a misdemeanor. And the misdemeanor was for like disturbing school environment or something like that. But the point is they found a way to charge him. And I think the way that we're viewing gun violence versus sexual violence points to something very, very dangerous in our culture that does not prioritize the safety of women and people who suffer sexual violence versus gun violence. I realize that by the book, by law, it's very, very different. But I think that's something we need to start thinking about and start reconsidering. Thanks.
We'll go to the lady on the left.
Hi, my name is Annie George. I'm a political science or a government and politics major. President Loh, you quoted the email earlier as saying F off, but that's not what we read. What we all had to read and why we're all so upset is they didn't say F consent, but it said fuck consent. It was a really vulgar email, and I'm not sure if you personally feel, you speak about the safety of all students and that safety is essential and we need to continue this dialogue. I don't think you understand how unsafe so many people feel because of this email. Last night, me and some friends were in McKeldin. We received your email saying that we need to forgive, and we counted at the desk that we were sitting at of 11 students, 8 were personally targeted in this email. It's the majority of students, it's not just minorities. Women and these groups that are targeted in this email makes up the majority of our student body. So my question for you is that, yes, it's legally sound that this fraternity is not being prosecuted because it is their constitutional right to say whatever they want. But a social organization that our university sponsors, if they are going on their university email and communicating in that way, and it's clear that their environment allows them to use that kind of language, how is our safety and our personal and mental health not a priority over a social organization? How do we sponsor this? How can you go to sleep knowing that you sponsor this social organization?
That's why we're having this conversation. If this were not so painful and difficult of an issue, we would not need to have this conversation. You raise a very good point. But at this time in our history, and going back all the way to the Enlightenment, this notion that freedom of speech is such a fundamental aspect that the most hideous things can be said, so long as they are not imminently about to incite action, is protected. And I would just make, I don't know if this is the right analogy, but it just occurred to me. Charlie Hebdo. Charlie Hebdo was murdered because he made these horrific cartoons about the Prophet Muhammad. Remember that one of the French police officers who tried to protect him and died was a Muslim who was profoundly offended by those cartoons as well. He literally gave his life for the protection of that principle. Now, whether that is good or not, all I'm saying is that when Voltaire said back in the 18th century, and this became the philosophical basis of the founders of this republic, I condemn what you say, but I will defend to the death your right to say it.
I'm sorry, it's not your personal safety that's affected by the matter. So you can say that you're going to defend it to death, but we're the ones who are feeling threatened, scared, marginalized. Like we can't go to a party and feel safe. Like black girls aren't welcome at parties. That's not your personal safety that's being affected. But thank you.
I can tell you, I want everybody to hear, This thing happened 15 months ago, and I'm going on dangerous waters because I'm not allowed to speak about certain things, but I can say in very general terms. In the 14 months, we have sanctioned sexual assault people. I have personally expelled them. We did this investigation in this particular case to see whether that particular email led to any risk. And the conclusion of our investigators was it did not. At the same time, the fact that there are people who feel at risk, I completely admit it. And I sympathize with you. All I'm saying is, unless there is evidence of imminent risk, the Constitution of the United States is, that is the price that we pay for freedom of speech.
Thank you for answering my question. I don't understand how the Constitution has to be university policy, but thank you.
Okay. Before we go to you in the middle, we have another question from Twitter. So we can get all these questions answered. At Song Stella, this is for President Loh. Do you believe the online sexual misconduct training was effective in working toward a safer environment?
Do I believe that this online training or any other course will change hearts and minds overnight? I'm not that naive. But I do believe that this student and all of us act not just because of our own motivations. We are products of our culture and our history. We absorb those values, sometimes often unconsciously, and they're buried in our mental architecture. I think education makes a difference. It does not make a difference overnight, but if you look at the progression over a number of decades, it does make a difference, and ultimately it's not about changing hearts and minds. I don't believe you can change hearts and minds, but you can change behavior. And if you change people's behavior, over time, they will change their hearts and minds.
Catherine, would you mind responding to that question as well?
Can you repeat the question about the training?
The question was, do you believe the sexual misconduct training was effective in working toward a safer environment?
I think that's a really good question, and I don't know. The training wasn't designed to necessarily change behavior. The training was specifically designed to make every student on campus aware of what our policy is, what prohibited conduct is, and what that looks like, what that means in terms that we can all understand, what the consequences are for violating that policy, and where to go for on-campus and off-campus assistance and help, and what your reporting options are. My name is Catherine Carroll. I'm the Title IX officer and the director of the Office of Civil Rights and Sexual Misconduct. The training itself is I think ultimately, if we could hope for anything, is to raise awareness about this issue. And at the end of the day, if students know where to go for help and where to get resources, that is the most important thing.
So do you think there is a possible way to make the training have a safer environment or work toward a safer environment?
An online training that an individual sits at a computer and does at 2 o'clock in the morning or 2 o'clock in the afternoon while they're eating or while they're listening to music or maybe while they're partying or maybe while they're doing a million other things is not the way people are going to change their behavior and attitudes around this topic. So I don't think any of us are naive enough to believe that that's going to make us safer by requiring students to take this training. But it is a beginning, because we got to start somewhere and we all got to get on the same page, right? So what I want to say to you is that CARE, Campus Advocates Respond and Educate to Stop Violence, is doing trainings all over campus about how to engage the community to put an end to sexual violence and to racial violence. I mean, all of these forms are connected, right? So most of us are not committing rapes. Most of us are not committing sexual harassment. Most of us are not speaking the way AJ did in his email. The vast majority of us have a lot more power, and we need to own the power and engage in the community and get involved in bystander training and interrupt this bad behavior and take responsibility for our own culture. So it's not one training. It's not another training. It's not even one email. It's a climate that we allow and tolerate because we don't interrupt microaggressions. So let's talk about that, right? Sorry.
Hi, my name is Nina. I'm a senior. I'm not completely sure who to address this to, but that email was instructing people to commit a violent felony. And as was mentioned earlier, other online threats of violent felonies were prosecuted in some way. So I'm wondering if there's any transparency as to what would cross the line. Like, for example, if the only way that this could be taken legally and that he could be responsible legally is if we found hard evidence that a sexual assault resulted as a direct effect of that email that night 14 months ago, then we'd have to find every single woman who went to that party, interrogate her, assume that she remembers everything, wasn't suppressing any memories, wasn't intoxicated in any way, wasn't drugged. And I just don't think that that's realistic. So is there any kind of transparency or accountability versus how we're responding to this threat of a violent felony versus how we would respond to another similar threat that wasn't including sexual violence or fraternity life?
Would any panelists like to answer that question?
So to put this in context, this email was 14 months ago, over a year. It went to a specific group of people. So I think that it's questionable that if it was a threatened felony because the investigation revealed the context in which it was presented. So the imminent threat did not exist. It was already an old email. I think that if people were specifically targeted, if there were names in it, or if there was potentially people who came forward and said, I experienced something in relation to this time period, it would be a completely different story, obviously. But we're sort of talking up here about what about this and what about that. And I really think the purpose of this forum was to talk about how we're going to acknowledge all of the problems that we have and the challenges ahead of us and deal with it and move forward. We got to lean into it, right? We got to embrace these problems and we got to embrace these challenges. And frankly, I have to say, I have a lot of respect for Dr. Loh to sit here and take it. I understand that he's the administrator of this institution and someone has to be, right? But he doesn't operate in kingdom land all by himself. And a lot of us are trying to work together across a very decentralized, massive community to really be honest about these issues and address them the best we can. And we need everybody. It can't just be little committees. It can't even be just one advisory group. So I just want to invite you all to get involved and not have conversations about what if this or what if that, right? How about just what about now and going forward?
My name is Maria Lyon. I'm the president of Theta Pi Sigma, the LGBT Greek organization on campus, and as well, I'm an intramural supervisor and referee. Given that background, I'm not ignorant enough to think that this was one individual in one Greek organization that did this. I'm not ignorant enough to know that it's limited to Greek life. However, in officiating, you have a series of punishments that get increasingly severe. You have a private word with a participant if they're being inappropriate, then you have a public warning. Then you go, in my case, I officiate soccer, you go yellow card, and then ultimately an ejection. What processes are we looking at in changing the University Code of Conduct to make this something that there are further steps in punishing? And I guess that can go either to you, Matt, or you, President Loh.
Let me answer that. Dr. Loh has asked our university legal counsel to take a look and review our code of conduct and to offer us suggestions on that. That's the step we're going to take down the road. And so we'll be looking at that. And I'm not sure exactly what we're going to do because as Dr. Loh says, free speech is a dominant part of our culture as well.
I agree with that. However, if that's not okay to stay on an intramural field, and it probably would not be okay to stay in a future place of work that we might be able to be in, if it's something we could get fired for in the future, it's probably not something that we should let happen on our university campus.
We're going to go to the gentleman in the middle.
Thank you. Thank you for your leadership, Dr. Loh, and distinguished panelists. My name is Nick Sakurai, and I work in the LGBT Equity Center. When I arrived here on campus in 2010, I discovered a campus without a women's center, without a Latina center, without an Asian American and Pacific Islander center, and with a limited, very little disability issues education. 12 years ago, as a graduating senior at the University of Illinois, a Big Ten school, I saw far more advancement on diversity efforts than I see here. As a concerned member of the UMD community, I have 7 concise suggestions. Most of these ideas are already happening or suggested, but their enactment is not codified or they require better funding and attention. 1 is to beware of words like unity and civility. The intentions may be good, but these words are often used to dampen dissent. 2, solidify our diversity and inclusion infrastructure. Hire a new Deputy Chief Diversity Officer. Look at building additional diversity centers. Ensure that the ones we have can fill and make permanent all of our staff positions. They're mission critical. Number 3, recognize that these issues are truly baked into our institution, from a stadium named for a racist to the current University of Maryland cheerleading tryout policies, which I have here, that prescribe 13 words for what male cheerleaders must do to try out and 103 words for what females must do to try out. Number 4, codify that any time a complaint is filed, that we review and address the culture around the complaint independent of the complaint itself. 5th, fund a deep and broad campus climate and needs assessment. Make the results public. 6, develop a strong bias incidents team where we can report incidents, including those that might create an exclusionary environment, whether or not they rise to a policy or legal violation. And 7th, create an ongoing campaign to encourage people to report incidents. Too many are scared of retribution or believe they won't get satisfaction. Something needs to change. I believe in this institution and the journey we can take together to create change. What we need is a renewed commitment and acknowledgement of how things are, really, and the energies, policies, and additional resources to move forward. Thank you.
All right, due to time constraints, we have 2 more. We're only allowed to take 2 more questions. So you to my left and in the middle, you all will have the last 2 questions of the forum. So we'll start on my left.
Hi, my name is Fasika. When I read the email, I was, of course, disgusted, just as you said, Dr. Wallace Loh. But I want to pose a different context for this situation. What if a faculty of this university, a staff member, a professor, sent that same sort of email to a group of his colleagues or her colleagues? What steps would be taken, and what is the difference between a faculty member sending that type of email and a student? Thank you. This is for Dr. Loh.
I think that's a very good question. And we will conduct an investigation exactly the same way we've conducted. This investigation would again be referred to the Office of Civil Rights and Sexual Misconduct. I would hope that we would treat everybody the same, but then on the other hand, there is the reality that this person is also a faculty member. So those are very difficult issues to weigh. And Catherine, you also are a lawyer. Would you like to opine? Because this is not my area of expertise, and you may. Oh, she's gone.
No, she's not. But we have to get to the next question.
Oh, okay. Sorry. Thank you for your good question, though.
Thank you.
He can, if he wants to finish, if you want to finish answering it, yes. But she can't answer it because we have to get to the last question.
I think it's a very good question, but I really don't know the answer. I wish I had answers to every single question, but I don't. But I commend you for raising a very good point, and maybe Catherine can shed some light on that very quickly.
So generally, yes. If that were a faculty member, for example, it would have everything to do with who was coming to complain. So if it was a colleague, was the complainant a faculty member? Was it a staff member? Was it a student? Like, who received it, right? Who's coming to our office filing the complaint? So some of it is the circumstances in which that information or that sort of hostile, reprehensible email is received? Was it after a bad meeting that they had the day before? Was it 2 months after, they had a falling out as colleagues? Like, we have to take into consideration the facts and circumstances that inform the investigation and the analysis that goes with that investigation. So when we say, go ahead. So if it was a similar context where the email was from a faculty member and it was 14 months old and it was on a private listserv, which actually this was, it was part of a smaller group of students that had their own private Google group. If that was sort of private, I mean, it sort of depends. Like, how did they even get access to the email? Were they one of the recipients to it? I mean, a lot of it would depend. And I know that that's a crappy answer and it's not what you guys want to hear, but that's how it goes. It's very fact-driven. It's very circumstance-driven. We have to have more information to know how we would deal with it. But hopefully, the idea and what we've really been paying attention to is that there is consistency and that what's a violation is a violation for faculty, is the same violation for students, is the same violation for employees. And in a university this size, that's a hard thing to do, but we're trying to get there. So I think that we are very mindful of that. And our office specifically deals with students, faculty, and staff. So we do see the broad spectrum and can hopefully provide more consistency across the campus with respect to discipline and or employment action.
All right, now we will have our final question from the lady in the middle.
Hello, my name is Jessica Richards. I'm here as a member of the Pan-Hellenic Association, but I'm also here as a member of the community who is personally affected by this email. And PHA has worked very hard the past few weeks to discuss the situation and actions that we can take so that this kind of incident doesn't occur again, and how we can change the culture so that it will never happen again. And I realize that many people in this room see our attempt at becoming involved in the situation as a publicity stunt, and it hurts me to hear that. And I really want to hear, I'm addressing the situation to other student representatives on the stage. What actions can we take to show you that we really do care about the situation and don't want this to be the culture of Maryland?
So actions that we can take towards, actions Greek life in particular can take towards showing that they are dedicated. I mean, first of all, when we heard the news about the $500 that were raised for the diversity trainings, that was insulting. $500? So having funding for for me, I want to be a community organizer after I graduate, right? So I say become an advocacy body, right? And things you can advocate for, funding to studies like African American studies, Asian American studies, Latino American studies, gender studies, women's studies. These are spaces that create real spaces for actually challenging things like white supremacy, challenging things like heteropatriarchy. If you look at the sorts of institutions that we sink millions of dollars into, they end up becoming bastions for these kinds of ideologies that we're trying to actively fight here today, right? So become an advocacy body. Fight for real institutional change. Don't do this liberal posturing where we just come up with a social media campaign. You have to make institutional changes. And you have to ask for big things, for real big things to start happening. So, thanks.
All right. Actually, we're gonna take one more question. So, plot twist, I know.
So, the people that are still up,
I know.
You guys can decide.
And before you ask your question, we apologize to anybody who sat down. We are under heavy time constraints, but we want to make sure people get their questions heard. So.
What's up? My name is Michael, and I'm here today as a student who was not directly affected, however, is directly offended by how we've been talking about this issue, how we've been addressing this issue. There were many questions on this Twitter feed that I thought were not addressed, and one of them I thought was really important was, what is the difference in how we approach sexual assault and how we approach things like gun violence on campus, in which sexual assault isn't taken as seriously, even though this thing about we've been talking about how whether or not it was an inanimate threat to how this email was not a direct threat to people. I'm pretty sure someone got raped during Sex Week a year ago. We keep talking about how it was a year ago. So think about how for a year someone has been dealing with that pain and it has not been addressed.
And my question, well, it's more so of a statement than a question, honestly. My name is Roland Zama, and I have a couple of statements I want to make. And I understand this is just a political thing. You guys are being politically correct, and you're in positions you have to be politically correct. I'm not. So I'm going to be honest about how I feel about this situation. For starters, and for starters, I promise you, if this was a black organization or a minority organization, we would not be having a town hall meeting protecting our freedom of speeches. No, we will not, okay? We would have gotten put on cease and desist, then had an investigation. That would have been the due process. But because it's not a minority organization, we're gonna have an investigation why they raised $500 and help, for this little educational program that they're gonna sit there and they're gonna go through PowerPoint slides while they're on their phones, on Twitter and whatnot, then go back to the same thing that they've been doing. But we're all gonna pretend like we solved it. Again, you guys be politically correct. I don't expect an answer, but I'm just gonna state how I feel about the situation. Because I do feel as though if this was a minority organization, we would not be sitting here. We would not be sitting here. I would have gotten an email from DFSL right now like, okay, call so you can schedule your hearing date. That's what we would have gotten. And I'm not just saying this, like this happened. This has happened multiple times. So how do we address the unequal treatment of minority organizations as opposed to white organizations? Because that's really how I feel. So anyone feel free to give me a politically correct answer.
Yeah.
All of you feel free.
Oh, you want the podium?
I'm glad we took one more question because this is an important issue, and certainly within fraternity and within fraternity and sorority life, I don't believe that disparity exists, but I am absolutely.
You told me that. Come on. And I have witnesses who heard you say this. Don't turn off my mic. Turn on 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 my mic.
Hey.
Turn on my mic.
Excuse me, yo. I understand the anger, but can we give people opportunity to answer the questions, even if you disagree? Yes. All right, appreciate it.
Yes.
But I am absolutely committed to trying to address whatever miscommunication and whatever secrecy seems to the perception is that exists. So if that means commissioning a student task force to review every one of the cease and desist orders that we've had in the past, I'm more than willing and committed to doing that. If it means finding ways to involve our current student leadership within the NPHC and multicultural Greek councils in the review process as we go forward with cases, I am more than willing to do that. Again, we're committed to trying to make sure that things like this don't have a place anywhere in our community, regardless of the organization, but that we are consistent in how we enforce whatever policies that are in place.
I expect you to say that. Don't get me wrong. Good answer. But, again, like I said, as far as, okay, you said, you're more than willing to go forth, and have students review. So what I'm asking for is 100% transparency with all these investigations. With the students, we get 100% transparency. And also, we would like to see past cases of, minority organizations as opposed to the white organizations. Like I would love to see that information. I would love to see how the same situations have been handled with different organizations and whatnot, because I really do feel that there is a disparity when it does come to treatment of minority organizations as opposed to white organizations. I feel as though there's a huge disparity there, and it's not something I'm making up, because you guys sitting here and you're protecting the freedom of speech. I got blocked from tweeting President Loh because I'm exercising the same rights you're here preaching about. I'm blocked from your Twitter feed. I'm blocked from your Twitter. I can't tweet you because I got blocked. Like whoever's in charge of your account, they blocked me because apparently I expressed too much freedom of speech. So then the question comes, so then the question is, and here's the thing, my question is, and literally my question is, so with freedom of speech, do you have freedom of speech only when you're white in University of Maryland, or do we all have freedom of speech, okay? Do we all have freedom of speech? Because, and another example, I can list examples all day. Another example, Kappa Alpha Psi, they had a party, and an individual chose to promote the party a certain way. The entire organization was held responsible, even though that's his own freedom of speech as well. There have been times where in my organization where they said we got a no contact order. They said I couldn't contact my fraternity brothers who were on campus, who are my friends. So I'm like, well, you're telling me I can't speak to my friends when I see them? Okay. So then, my fraternity brother happens to tweet me on Twitter, and we violated university policies. Again, that's freedom of speech. But, and I'm not just making these things up. We have you sent us the documents. So you have them.
So I want to address that in two ways. First of all, I met with the NPHC leadership earlier this week to try and
I'm not in the NPHC. Guess why? Guess why? Because we're suspended. How was I supposed to be aware of that?
So I met with the NPHC leadership to try and find ways to ensure that there is transparency as much as possible, although some of these cases may involve situations that are protected.
Well,
I'd like to go back and address one of the things that you said about Kappa Alpha Psi. The individual you're talking about sent it over a chapter Twitter account. And so we've made a distinction between an individual and his ability or her ability to have freedom of speech and an organization and the messages that they send out under a chapter account. And so, again, we may disagree on that, and I would more than welcome whatever the conversation is for us to be able to have some of that dialogue around how we can improve whatever our process is.
Okay. I'm willing. I'm not here just being angry and being emotional. I'm being logical as well. Like, I'm willing to sit down and talk about the things that I do feel that went wrong with my situation, other situations that I do know. And it's not something. I'm not sitting here just here to bash the leadership or whatnot, because I am open to trying to move forward. Because at the end of the day, I don't want this to happen again, and that's the only reason I left work early to come here, because I don't want this to happen again. It's literally Is AJ still allowed to speak to his fraternity brothers? Yeah. Oh, he is, right? And he left school voluntarily, too. But it's cool.
Yeah, do you want to talk?
Hello. My name's Alex Spector, and I'm the president of AEPI, the Jewish fraternity here on campus, and also a member of the IFC. I had a whole different thing I wanted to say when I was coming up here, and I'm not going to say it now. After hearing everything and seeing everything here, I can honestly say that my gut hurts. I was going to say that as Jewish men, we feel the pain of the racism and bigotry and exclusion, but I personally don't. And after just seeing what just happened here the last 10 minutes, I guess I'm here to apologize. I guess that wasn't my plan, but I'm on behalf of the IFC. I just also to follow up on Jess's question. Jess said that she doesn't really know what we can do to help. Like, we're planning events and trying to get other people involved, but that clearly isn't a solution. And we had one person answer that, but I was wondering if I could ask, like, the crowd
Amber.
to answer Jess's question.
Amber.
If you can just, yeah. If you want to just, you want to give her the mic?
Amber, come here.
My name is Amber Evings. I'm not a member of Greek Life, but as a person that was deeply offended by the email, with your organizations and as a representative of the organizations that you're speaking of, I think it would be incredibly beneficial to have minorities, representatives from BSU and LSU and representatives of the MPHC organizations present for these conversations so that they're open dialogues like this and that you make these conversations an open forum. Someone previously said that these conversations are only open to presidents, but presidents, yes, you may represent your organization, but that person may not represent all the ideas and the feelings behind all the people in the organization. So I think that would be incredibly beneficial. And also, if there are any minority people that are in these organizations, I think that it would be incredibly beneficial for us to hear from them also. How you feel being a member of Kappa Sigma or these other organizations that are predominantly white with representatives from your council using this type of language to describe you.
Hi, my name is Natalie Costa. I'm president of Global Community Student Association, and I think one of the ways you guys could really help is just plan events with other multicultural organizations. Like Global Communities itself is a community with people from all over the world, and because of that, I've learned a lot from my different experiences with those people. So I don't think it's always and naturally conversations about race and sexism and stuff like that just come up because you're with different people. So I believe that if you guys just had events that incorporated different cultures in them, like having cultural nights or something, and you just learned about other cultures, and I'm not saying you're ignorant to that stuff, not everyone is, but if you just planned events like that, instead of just giving presentations and stuff, I think that would create a more inclusive world within the fraternity and sorority and the campus as a whole.
So hi, I'm Justin Gallardo. I'm a senior. I actually do have a question for the president. So, I'd like to know where those emails were sent because in 2012, as you know, Mr. Sung sent those things on Reddit on a university system. Was the Kappa Sig's email sent on the university system? Because I do not want my tuition money to be paid for anything that promotes sexual assault, hate speech, anti-religious violence, any forms of violence, and any forms of racism. And I have a rhetorical question for Kappa Sig, because this really offends me. What took you so long to realize that what's hurting many people at this university? That this could potentially cause problems at this university, and yet you never did anything to discipline. And what's more embarrassing for your organization is that, all you can say is, we're sorry. We're sorry that that email ever got out.
So, your question is directed.
As a person who almost was sexually assaulted.
So your question is directed to President Loh?
Yes.
Okay.
What exactly was the question again?
The question, Mr. Loh,
Yeah.
was that email sent on our university server that we, the undergraduates, pay for, that we pay for with our tuition? And did Kappa Sig have access to that? And is our money, how much is it spent on Kappa Sig? Because I don't want my tuition money to spend on groups that promote any forms of violence, hate speech, sexual assault, racism, anti-religious violence.
Your question is, was it sent on a server operated by the university?
Yes.
I don't know the question. Catherine, do you know the question?
No, the question is, was it on the university server? Was it sent through the university server?
I don't know. I would have to ask the IT persons.
So what's the silver lining of this First Amendment policy? Is it where it's sent?
So let me just clarify. The email was not on the university system. It was on Gmail, which is a Google system out there in the cloud, and it was a specific closed group.
So is Kappa Sig's emails regulated by this university? I would like to know that.
It's not identifiable through a organization like that. I mean, it's Gmail.
Okay, yeah, so sorry to break it up, but yeah. For a second, can we get one more? Can we?
No, we gotta wrap it.
We gotta wrap it? Okay, we have to wrap it up.
Just, it's really quick.
We
can't.
We really can't.
You guys, I sat down like 3 times and you let other people go. It's really quick. I just wanted to know, as a former member of the university student judiciary, where students are trained to examine violations of the student conduct, and I know for a fact as a former member that instances do not have to violate federal law to violate the student conduct, why was this incident not even referred to the university student office of student conduct?
All right, 2 things. Who was that addressed to?
Yeah, whoever is, I don't remember her name.
Okay, and after this question is answered, I know it sucks, but we cannot ask any more questions due to time. So take it out on me if you want to, I guess. I don't know. It's all good.
So I want to be really transparent here and just say, this email on its face was 14 months old. It did not pose any imminent threat. And my office is slammed doing investigations on cases where people actually have been raped and they have been sexually assaulted. And we looked into this email and we found out, and believe me, we looked, because I said, wow, this reads like a call to rape. This reads like, hey, come on guys, let's make sure we get our rape on. If you guys think that we didn't have that perspective, of course we did. We didn't refer it to student conduct because there was nothing to charge the student with. It's not about Section 10A. You know what, you guys? I gotta tell you, I have received tons of emails from students. I personally have been told that I should be sexually assaulted before I ask someone to do an online training. So you guys need to understand that this sort of email, this stuff is going on all the time. It's on Twitter accounts, it's on Snapchat, it's on Yik Yak. No, it doesn't make it okay, but what it makes it is impossible for my office to regulate what's on there in social media when we are actually investigating sexual assaults.
Hey, excuse me. I know this is a very touchy matter, but you have to let them answer the questions, and we can't have comments coming in from the crowd because that further keeps it going.
So I want to ask you guys to step back and have some grace, because we only have so much capacity to deal with what's in front of us. And what we're looking at is a cultural issue, and we're looking at climate issues, and a lot of them intersect with a lot of other things. And so we're having this forum to talk about it, and some of you aren't going to be happy about the answers, but we're doing the best we can. And we could use a lot more community engagement, at least my office could, which is why we have a graduate advisory group and an undergraduate advisory group, and why we're always talking with students. So if you guys want to engage our office and help us figure out how to do it better, please do, because we want students involved. So I'm not here to criticize, I'm here to move forward. And I don't think that necessarily having a policy to address everything is going to change the culture that allows that conversation to happen.
I'm going to be really quick. I know, like you guys said, no more questions. I'm not asking any questions. I'm just going to make a statement. I'm Diana. I'm a president of Latino Student Union, and I'm also a sister of an organization within MGC. If you here are in an organization, minority, cultural, anything like that, that advocates for the growth and awareness of your group, please raise your hand. Like BSU, LSU, NAACP. So for those of you who ask how you can get involved, look at the people that raise their hand and have a conversation with them, because they're the ones holding events and programs that address these issues. We're the ones having the conversations. You're not gonna get that through trainings or online programs. You're gonna get it from sitting down with someone and engaging in conversation. I get that this forum was supposed to make that happen, but us sitting here and listening isn't gonna solve the problem. Us engaging in conversation is gonna let that happen. So get up out your seat and talk to those people who raise their hand. If those people could raise their hand one more time, take a good look at these people in the room. Go up to them and ask how you, as an organization, as a Greek organization, can improve your image on this campus, and talk to those people.
Alex. No, Alex, I can't. I can't.
We gotta
I can't.
shut it down. Yeah. Sorry, we gotta shut it down like that. I'm not trying to be mean or anything, but it's time constraints. But it's cool. All right, we thank you all for coming out to the forum. Hopefully some of the questions got answered, and hopefully we can continue the dialogue and getting more questions answered. Thank you.